The lunch rush had ended and the evening crowd hadn't arrived yet. May wiped down the tables at the Silver Spoon, a high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of the city. Classical music played softly in the background as she moved from table to table, her movements quick and efficient after 3 years of working there. "New reservations just came in," called out Robbie, the host with the carefully waxed mustache. "Some big shot is hosting a private party this weekend. All hands on deck." May nodded without looking up. Extra shifts meant extra money, and she needed every penny. Her tiny apartment across town wasn't much, but it was close to the music school where she took night classes when she could afford them. Growing up in a small town with parents who worked at the local factory, May had discovered her love for piano by accident. The elementary school had an old upright in the music room, and when she first placed her small fingers on the keys at age 7, something magical happened. The teacher had called her a natural. For years, she practiced on that school piano during lunch breaks and after classes. Her parents had scraped together enough for basic lessons, proud of their daughter's talent but unable to afford the kind of training she really needed. By high school, May was playing pieces that made her teacher's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "You could go places," the woman had told her, helping May apply for scholarships. She'd won a partial one to a decent music program, but not enough to cover living expenses. So here she was at 24, balancing trays instead of playing concertos. "Earth to May," said Tanya, another server, snapping her fingers. "You're doing that thing again where you conduct with your cleaning rag." May blinked, realizing her hand had been moving to the rhythm of the Mozart piece playing overhead. She quickly stuffed the rag in her apron pocket. "Sorry, million miles away." "Let me guess," Tanya said, leaning against the bar. "You were at Carnegie Hall? Or maybe Royal Albert?" May smiled weakly. Her co-workers knew about her musical background, but she rarely talked about it anymore. Dreams deferred too long start to ache when you poke at them. Staff meeting, called the manager. A balding man named Phil who had once harbored dreams of becoming a chef, but had settled for managing other people's cooking instead. The entire waitstaff gathered near the kitchen doors. "Listen up, everyone. This weekend's private party is a big deal. The host is Jackson Powell." A murmur went through the staff. Everyone knew Powell's name. The tech entrepreneur turned investor who owned half the commercial real estate in the downtown area, including the building that housed the Silver Spoon. "He's bringing 40 guests, all high profile. Politicians, business partners, the works," Phil continued. "This could mean big tips for you all, but also, and I cannot stress this enough, big trouble if anything goes wrong." The staff exchanged nervous glances. Phil rarely looked this serious. "Powell's parties are known for being elaborate," Phil said carefully. "Last year he rented out the botanical gardens and had aerialists hanging from the trees." Tanya leaned over to whisper, "Wonder what the theme is this time? Space cowboys? Underwater ballet?" "Classical music," Phil answered, overhearing. "He's turning our back room into a mini concert hall. There'll be a string quartet during dinner, and then some famous pianist is flying in for the main event." May felt a familiar twinge in her chest. She still tried to practice when she could, on a second-hand electronic keyboard in her apartment with headphones so as not to disturb her neighbors. Sometimes she'd splurge and rent time at a practice room at the music school, just to feel real keys under her fingers. "May, you're on the VIP tables with Tanya and David," Phil said, checking his clipboard. "The rest of you will handle the outer tables and drink service." The meeting wrapped up and the staff dispersed to prepare for the dinner service. As May tied on a fresh apron, Tanya nudged her shoulder. "Hey, you okay? You've got that look." "What look?" "That I'm fine, but actually I'm dying inside look." May forced a smile. "Just thinking about rent. It's due next week." "Aren't we all?" Tanya sighed. "Hey, want to grab coffee after shift? That new place on 6th has open mic night. You could play something." "Maybe another time," May said, the way she always did. She hadn't performed in public for almost 2 years, not since a small recital at her night school. The thought of sitting at a piano with eyes on her made her stomach clench with a mixture of longing and terror. The week flew by in a blur of routine, taking orders, carrying plates, smiling at customers who didn't see past her uniform. By Saturday, the entire staff was on edge about Powell's party. May arrived early to help with setup. The back room had been transformed. The regular tables were gone, replaced by round ones covered in cream-colored linen. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandeliers. In the corner stood a gleaming black grand piano, delivered that morning. She couldn't help herself. While the room was empty, May walked over to it, running her fingers lightly over the polished surface. A Steinway, probably worth more than she'd make in 10 years. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully lifted the lid and pressed one key, so softly it barely made a sound. Perfect action. Perfectly tuned. Beautiful, isn't it? Came a voice behind her. May jumped back from the piano like she'd been caught stealing. It was Phil carrying a box of wine glasses. "Sorry, I was just—" "No worries," he said, setting down the box. "I didn't know you played." "I don't, not really. Not anymore." The lie felt bitter on her tongue. Phil looked like he might say something else, but the delivery entrance buzzed and he hurried off to deal with the florist. May busied herself with final preparations, folding napkins and arranging silverware with precision. She tried not to look at the piano again, but her eyes kept drifting to it. When the other staff arrived, Tanya caught her staring. "Hey, don't you play?" "Used to," May said shortly. "You should sneak in a tune when everyone's gone," Tanya suggested with a wink. May shook her head. "And risk Powell walking in? No thanks. I need this job." The guests began arriving at 7, men in expensive suits and women in cocktail dresses that probably cost more than May's monthly rent. She kept her head down, professional and invisible as she'd learned to be. The string quartet played softly in the background, 4 stern-faced musicians in black. Powell himself arrived fashionably late, a tall man with a booming laugh who moved through the crowd like he owned it, which technically he did. May served his table with extra care, making sure his wine glass was never empty. "The pianist is delayed," she overheard him tell his table mates with a frown. "Flight issues in Chicago. They're not sure he'll make it at all." As the dinner service progressed, May noticed Powell becoming increasingly agitated, checking his watch and phone. The string quartet finished their set and began packing up. During dessert, she saw him in an intense conversation with Phil near the kitchen doors, gesturing in frustration. When she returned to the kitchen with a tray of empty plates, Phil pulled her aside. "Powell's pianist isn't going to make it," he whispered. "He's freaking out. The music is apparently a key part of tonight. He's trying to impress some Japanese investors who are big classical music patrons." "That's unfortunate," May said carefully, already guessing where this might be going. "Tanya mentioned you play." "Like really play?" May felt her chest tighten. "Phil, no. I haven't performed in years." I'm not asking you to," he assured her quickly. "Powell's calling around for last-minute replacements. I just thought, well, if nothing works out and he asks if anyone here plays, should I mention you?" The thought sent a wave of panic through her. "No, absolutely not. I'm a waitress tonight, that's it." Phil nodded, looking both relieved and disappointed. "Fair enough. Just thought I'd check." May returned to her tables, hands slightly unsteady as she poured coffee. Across the room she could see Powell still on his phone, face tense. The evening was winding down, the perfect dinner service nearly complete except for the missing finale. She told herself it wasn't her problem. She was here to serve food and clear tables, not to rescue some rich man's party. Yet as she worked, her eyes kept drifting to that beautiful Steinway sitting silent and waiting in the corner of the room, its presence like a question no one was answering. Dessert service was almost complete, and May felt a small sense of relief. Just a little longer and her part in this high-pressure evening would be over. She delivered a plate of delicate chocolate mousse to an older woman draped in pearls, then stepped back against the wall with the other servers, ready to respond to any raised hand or empty glass. Across the room, Powell had stopped making phone calls. Instead, he was speaking intently with Phil, their heads bent close together. Phil kept shaking his head, but Powell wasn't taking no for an answer. That much was clear from his body language. Finally, Phil's shoulders slumped in what looked like defeat, and he reluctantly nodded. An uneasy feeling crept into May's stomach as Phil made his way across the room toward the staff. He beckoned to her with a quick, apologetic gesture. "I need you to come with me," he said quietly. "What's going on?" she asked, though she already suspected. "Powell wants to speak with you." May froze. "You didn't tell him, did you?" Phil looked miserable. Tanya might have mentioned something to one of the bartenders who told Powell's assistant. "I'm sorry." "May, he's insisting on talking to you." She felt betrayed. "I told you I don't perform anymore. Just hear him out, okay? He's our biggest client. He owns the building." May wanted to refuse, to walk out and never come back. But reality crashed down around her. Rent was due next week. Her last student loan payment had bounced, and good restaurant jobs were hard to find. With leaden feet, she followed Phil to where Powell stood near the piano, sipping his bourbon. "Mr. Powell, this is May," Phil introduced her, then quickly retreated, leaving her alone with the businessman. Powell studied her with sharp eyes. He was taller up close, with the confident posture of someone used to getting his way. "I understand you play piano," he said without preamble. "I used to," May replied, keeping her voice professional. "It's been a while." "How long is a while?" "I practice sometimes, but I haven't performed for about 2 years." Powell glanced at the Steinway, then back at her. "My pianist is stuck in Chicago. Weather delay. These things happen, but timing is everything in business. I have guests here tonight who appreciate fine music, and I promised them a memorable performance." May's throat felt dry. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. Phil tells me you were in a music program. Classically trained?" She nodded reluctantly. "I studied for a while, yeah." "Perfect. I need you to play a few pieces. It wasn't a request." His tone made that clear. May took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I appreciate your situation, Mr. Powell, but I'm here as a server tonight. I'm not prepared to perform." His eyebrows shot up as if he wasn't used to being refused. "I'll compensate you, of course. $500 for 30 minutes. The amount made her breath catch, nearly a week's pay for half an hour. But the thought of sitting at that piano with 40 pairs of eyes on her made her palms sweat. She hadn't played for an audience in so long, and certainly never for people of this caliber. "I'm sorry, I can't," she said, her voice smaller than she intended. Powell's friendly demeanor cooled. $1,000. May stared at him, tempted beyond words. With that money, she could catch up on her rent, maybe even afford another class next semester. But the fear was paralyzing. "It's not about the money," she managed to say. I'm not ready to perform." Powell's jaw tightened. He took a slow sip of his bourbon before speaking again. "Let me be clear. I need a pianist tonight. You are apparently qualified. I've offered generous compensation. What's the problem?" The problem was the panic rising in her chest, the memory of freezing on stage during her last recital, the crushing disappointment she'd felt afterward. The problem was that music had once been everything to her, and now it was a wound she didn't want reopened. "I get stage fright," she said finally, a half-truth that was easier than explaining the whole mess. Powell laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Everyone gets nervous. Have a drink. You'll be fine." May could feel the situation slipping out of her control. She looked around desperately for Phil, but he was carefully avoiding her gaze from across the room. "Mr. Powell, I really don't think. Here's what I think." Powell interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "I think you work at my restaurant, in my building. I think Phil would be very disappointed if I expressed any dissatisfaction with tonight's service. I think a smart young woman like you understands how important references are in this industry." The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. May felt her face grow hot with anger and humiliation. She'd dealt with difficult customers before, but never one with this much power over her livelihood. "That's not fair," she said quietly. "Life rarely is," Powell replied with a shrug. "Look, I'm not asking you to perform brain surgery. Just play a few classical pieces for my guests. Surely that's not too much to ask." Before she could respond, he gestured to someone across the room. A moment later, a slender woman with an elegant updo approached them. "Ling, this is May. She's going to provide our musical entertainment tonight. Please make the announcement in 5 minutes." The woman, presumably his assistant, nodded efficiently and walked away, leaving no room for further objection. Powell turned back to May with a satisfied smile. "Chopin, Beethoven, whatever you like. Just make it impressive." He pressed his business card into her hand. "Come see me at my office on Monday about payment." With that, he walked away, rejoining his guests as if the matter was settled. In his world, perhaps it was. May stood frozen, the business card clutched in her fingers. Tanya appeared at her side, eyes wide with excitement. "Is it true? Are you going to play?" "I don't have much choice," May said bitterly. Tanya's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "He basically threatened my job if I didn't." "That's awful," Tanya said, her excitement dimming. "Can he even do that?" May slipped the business card into her pocket. "He owns the building. He's friends with Phil, what do you think?" Before Tanya could answer, Powell's assistant tapped a knife against a crystal glass, the clear ringing sound silencing the room. Conversations died away as all eyes turned toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced in a polished voice, "Mr. Powell is delighted to present an unexpected musical treat this evening. Please welcome Mei Chen, who will be performing several classical selections for us tonight." A polite round of applause followed, along with curious glances in Mei's direction. The assistant gestured toward the piano with an elegant sweep of her arm. Mei felt like she was in a dream, the bad kind where you're forced to take a test you haven't studied for. Her feet seemed to move of their own accord as she crossed the room, painfully aware of her server's uniform and the eyes following her progress. The piano bench was cold beneath her as she sat down. She adjusted it slightly, an automatic gesture from years of practice. The keys gleamed under the chandelier light, intimidating in their perfection. Her hands hovered above them, trembling slightly. What would she play? Her mind raced through possibilities. Something simple to warm up? No, Powell wanted impressive. These weren't casual listeners. Many were probably far more knowledgeable about classical music than the average audience. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second. Someone coughed. A wine glass clinked against a table. Her fingers descended on the keys, choosing for her before her brain could catch up. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room, a piece she had practiced obsessively in school, one that lived in her muscle memory. The first few measures were shaky, her fingers stiff with nerves. A wrong note here, a stumble there. She kept her eyes fixed on the keys, too afraid to look up at the audience at Powell's likely disappointment. Then something shifted. Perhaps it was the familiar pattern of the music, or the quality of the Steinway so responsive under her touch. The room around her faded as she sank deeper into the piece, letting the music take over. Her hands remembered what her conscious mind had forgotten, the subtle dynamics, the emotional arc of the composition. By the time she reached the middle section, the initial terror had receded. There was only the music now, speaking through her fingers as it always had. She swayed slightly on the bench, lost in the building intensity of the piece. When she reached the powerful final section, her entire body was involved, channeling the emotional turbulence of Chopin's creation. The final chords resonated through the room, hanging in the air for a breathless moment before dying away. Mei remained still, eyes closed, afraid to break the spell. Then came the applause, not the polite, obligatory kind she had expected, but enthusiastic, genuine. She opened her eyes and finally looked up. The expressions on the faces around her weren't bored or critical. They were stunned. The applause washed over Mei like a warm wave. For a moment she sat perfectly still, hardly believing what had just happened. She had played, really played, and nothing terrible had occurred. No memory lapses, no paralysis, no disaster. "Brava," called out an older gentleman near the front, breaking into enthusiastic clapping that seemed to give permission for others to express their appreciation more openly. Mei's eyes found Powell, who was watching her with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. He raised his glass in a small toast, his earlier threatening demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like respect. She should stop now. One piece was enough to fulfill his demand. Yet her fingers lingered on the keys, remembering their cool smoothness, the perfect weight of their action. How long had it been since she'd played on a piano of this quality? Her keyboard at home, with its plastic keys and tinny sound, was a poor substitute for this magnificent instrument. Almost without conscious decision, she began to play again. This time she chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, bold, technically demanding with its thundering chords and rapid runs. It was a piece that had once been her showstopper, one she'd performed in competitions during her brief competitive years. The muscle memory was astonishing. Though she hadn't played this piece in full for at least a year, her hands knew exactly where to go, flying across the keyboard with increasing confidence. The rich bass notes rumbled through the room as her left hand hammered out the dramatic opening theme. She was vaguely aware of people shifting in their seats, leaning forward, conversations completely abandoned. Someone gasped audibly during a particularly difficult passage. The room's energy had changed completely. The diners no longer society figures making small talk over dessert, but an audience witnessing something unexpected. When she finished the Rachmaninoff, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Mei felt a flush of pleasure rise to her cheeks. She hadn't experienced this feeling in so long. the unique joy of connecting with listeners through music, of taking them on an emotional journey. "Who is she?" she heard someone whisper loudly. "Powell's, always full of surprises," another guest replied. May glanced toward the kitchen doors and caught a glimpse of Tanya and the other servers watching wide-eyed from the service area. Phil stood among them, his earlier anxiety replaced by astonishment. A tall, distinguished-looking woman in a midnight blue dress approached the piano. She had silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant bun and carried herself with unmistakable authority. "That was quite remarkable," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent May couldn't place. "Especially for someone who hasn't performed in years, as I understand it." May nodded, suddenly self-conscious again. "Thank you." "I'm Vivian Coe," the woman said, extending her hand. "I teach at the Westridge Conservatory." May's heart skipped a beat. Westridge was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. She shook the woman's hand, trying not to appear as starstruck as she felt. "Do you have time for one more piece?" Vivian asked. "Perhaps something more contemplative?" May hesitated only briefly before nodding. She took a deep breath and began Debussy's Clair de Lune, letting the gentle, impressionistic piece flow through her fingers. The dreamy, moonlit quality of the music transformed the atmosphere in the room yet again. Where the Rachmaninoff had been all fire and technical brilliance, this was pure poetry, delicate, nuanced, and deeply expressive. She played with her eyes closed for much of it, swaying gently with the music's ebb and flow. When the final gossamer notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began, softer this time, almost reverent. Vivian was still standing by the piano, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Fascinating," she said quietly. "Three completely different pieces, three different sides of you as an artist." "I'm not really an artist," May said, suddenly feeling like an imposter. "Just a waitress who used to play." Vivian's eyebrows rose. "That's not what I just heard." She glanced around the room, then back at May. "Would you step outside with me for a moment? I'd like to speak with you privately." Before May could respond, Powell appeared at her side. "Outstanding performance," he said, beaming as if he'd discovered her himself. "My guests are thoroughly impressed. Thank you for the opportunity," May replied, choosing her words carefully. "Jackson," Vivian greeted him with the familiarity of an old acquaintance. "Your server appears to be something of a hidden treasure." Powell looked pleased. "I have an eye for talent in unexpected places." "Indeed," Vivian said dryly. "I was just asking if she might step outside with me for a brief conversation." Of course," Powell agreed magnanimously. "Take all the time you need. The night is yours, May." It was strange hearing him use her name with such warmth when just an hour ago he'd been threatening her job. She rose from the piano bench, legs a bit wobbly from the adrenaline. Tanya rushed over as she stepped away from the piano. "That was incredible," she whispered fiercely. "Why didn't you tell me you could play like that?" "It's complicated," May said, still feeling slightly dazed by the whole experience. "Take your time," Phil told her, appearing at Tanya's side. His earlier discomfort had been replaced by something like awe. "I had no idea." Vivian led May through the French doors onto the restaurant's small terrace. The night air was cool against May's flushed face. City lights sparkled below them and a sliver of moon hung in the sky. "You have extraordinary talent," Vivian said without preamble. "What happened?" The direct question caught May off guard. "What do you mean?" "People with your level of ability don't usually end up serving canapes," Vivian said bluntly. "You've had serious training, yet you're not performing or teaching. I'm curious why." May looked out at the city lights, gathering her thoughts. She'd rarely spoken about this to anyone. "I was in a music program at State," she began. "Scholarship student. Things were going well until my third year when my mother got sick. Cancer. I had to drop out to help care for her and support my parents." "I'm sorry," Vivian said, her tone softening. "She recovered, thankfully," May continued. "But by then I'd lost my scholarship. I tried to keep up with my playing while working full-time, but it wasn't the same. Then I had a bad experience at a recital, completely froze up on stage. After that I just stopped performing. But not playing altogether," Vivian observed. "No," May admitted. "I couldn't give it up completely. I have a keyboard at home. I practice when I can." Vivian nodded thoughtfully. "That explains the technical foundation still being there. But what I heard tonight wasn't just technique. There was something else, a maturity, an emotional depth that's rare even among conservatory students. May looked down, uncomfortable with the praise. Maybe some things improve with time even without formal practice. Life experience shapes artistry, Vivian agreed. You've clearly lived in the years since you left school. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party drifting out through the open doors. Westridge has a special program, Vivian said eventually, for exceptional talents who don't fit the traditional student profile. Older students, those with unusual backgrounds or circumstances. We provide scholarships, flexible scheduling. May's heart began to beat faster. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you should apply, Vivian said simply. I sit on the admissions committee. I'd be happy to recommend you. The offer was so unexpected that May hardly knew how to respond. I have a job, rent to pay. I can't go back to being a full-time student. The program is designed for working adults, Vivian explained. Evening classes, weekend workshops, and the scholarship includes a stipend for living expenses. Even so, May hesitated. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. To step back into that world after all this time, and could she do it? What if she failed again? You don't have to decide tonight, Vivian said, reaching into her clutch and extracting a business card. Think about it. Call me when you're ready. May took the card, staring at the embossed Westridge logo. Why would you do this for a complete stranger? Vivian smiled. Because talent like yours deserves nurturing, not wasting away in a restaurant. And because 20 years ago, someone did the same for me when I was working as a hotel housekeeper in Singapore. Before May could respond, the French doors opened and Powell stepped onto the terrace. Sorry to interrupt. Ladies, but my guests are requesting an encore, he said, looking pleased with himself. They won't take no for an answer. Vivian gave May a knowing look. The audience beckons. As they walked back inside, May felt as though she were moving between two worlds. The familiar one of service and invisibility, and a forgotten one of music and possibility. The weight of Vivian's card in her pocket felt like a key to a door she'd thought permanently locked. The guests applauded as she returned to the piano. This time, as she sat down on the bench, she didn't feel the earlier panic or resistance. Instead, there was a curious lightness in her chest, a sense of reconnection with a part of herself she'd buried for too long. She looked up at the expectant faces and, for the first time that evening, smiled. Then she began to play. For her encore, May chose a piece she hadn't played in years, Liszt's Liebestraum No. 3. As a student, she'd found its technical demands frustrating, but tonight her fingers seemed to find their own way through the delicate passages and sweeping arpeggios. The music poured out of her with an emotional honesty that surprised even herself. When she finished, several guests rose to their feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Powell looked absolutely triumphant, as if her performance reflected his own brilliance. Vivian stood quietly at the edge of the room, watching with thoughtful eyes. After a final bow, May managed to slip away from the piano. The night had stretched far beyond her usual shift hours, and an odd mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration coursed through her body. She retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment to process everything that had happened. That was unbelievable, Tanya said, following her through the swinging doors, like professional level stuff. Why are you even working here? May leaned against the stainless steel counter, suddenly aware of how tired she was. It's complicated. Well, uncomplicated, Tanya insisted. That Vivian lady seemed pretty interested. What did she want? Before May could answer, Phil entered the kitchen, his face flushed with excitement. May, the guests are leaving, but several of them asked for your contact information. One guy wants to know if you give private lessons, and someone else mentioned a charity event next month. I told them I'd check with you. The idea of more performances brought a fresh wave of anxiety. I don't know, Phil. Tonight was unexpected. I'm not sure I'm ready for more. Ready or not, you're getting noticed, Phil said. Powell's thrilled, by the way. Says you saved the evening. He wants to speak with you before you leave. May nodded wearily. After everything, she still had to face Powell again, the man who'd bullied her into performing in the first place. As the kitchen staff began the late-night cleanup, May slipped back into the dining room to help clear tables. Despite Phil's protest that she'd done enough tonight, she preferred keeping busy to standing around fielding questions about her playing. The room had mostly emptied, with just a few lingering guests finishing their drinks. Powell sat at a corner table with Vivian and two other people May didn't recognize, deep in conversation. When he spotted her collecting wine glasses, he waved her over. "The woman of the hour," he announced as she approached. "Everyone, this is May, our hidden talent." May nodded politely, uncomfortable with the attention. "I should finish helping with cleanup, Mr. Powell." "Nonsense. Sit down. Join us for a moment." He pulled out an empty chair beside him. It wasn't really a request. Reluctantly, May sat, still in her server's uniform, feeling out of place among these elegantly dressed people. "This is Dr. Liu from the Pacific Symphony," Powell said, gesturing to a serious-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses. "And this is Diane Nakamura, who runs the Arts Foundation downtown. They were very impressed with your performance." "It was quite remarkable," Dr. Liu agreed, "especially for someone who hasn't been actively performing." "Where did you study?" Ms. Nakamura asked, studying May with interest. "State University for 3 years," May replied. "I had to leave before completing my degree." "A shame," Dr. Liu said. "You have considerable talent. Raw in places but with great potential." Powell looked pleased, as if he were personally responsible for discovering her. "I told you she was something special. Found her right under my nose serving drinks." He laughed heartily at his own joke. May kept her expression neutral, though his words stung. "Just hours ago, he had threatened her job if she didn't perform." "Vivian tells me she's discussed the Westridge program with you," Ms. Nakamura said. "It's an excellent opportunity. I sit on their foundation board." "I'm still considering it," May said carefully. "Don't consider too long," Dr. Liu advised. "Opportunities have a way of passing by if we hesitate." Powell leaned forward, suddenly businesslike. "Here's what I propose, May. You clearly have a gift that's being wasted on serving tables. I have connections throughout the city's cultural scene." He gestured to the people around the table. "I'd like to help you restart your career." May was taken aback. "That's very generous, but I host events regularly," Powell continued, cutting her off. "You could perform at them, build a reputation, make contacts. Eventually move into teaching, recitals, whatever you want. Vivian can guide you academically, and I can open doors professionally." The offer was unexpected and overwhelming. Part of May longed to say yes immediately, to leave behind the long hours on her feet, the financial struggles, the feeling that her real talents were slowly withering away. But another part remembered the way Powell had coerced her earlier, using his power to force her compliance. "Why would you do this?" she asked directly. Powell seemed surprised by the question. "Because I recognize talent and opportunity. It's what I do." "And because he enjoys being associated with exceptional people," Vivian added with a knowing smile. "Jackson likes to collect artists like others collect paintings." Powell laughed, not denying it. "There are worse things than having a wealthy patron, May. Musicians have relied on them for centuries." May looked around the table at these powerful people who suddenly saw value in her. Just hours ago, she had been invisible to them, just another server in the background of their privileged lives. Now they were planning her future over drinks. "I appreciate the offer," she said slowly, "but I need time to think about it." Of course," Powell said magnanimously. "Take the weekend." "But I meant what I said earlier. Come to my office on Monday. We'll discuss the details and your compensation for tonight." With that, he stood, signaling the end of the conversation. The others rose as well, exchanging business cards and promises to be in touch. Vivian gave May a small, encouraging nod before following Powell toward the exit. Left alone at the table, May exhaled slowly, trying to process everything. The evening had taken so many unexpected turns that her head was spinning. "You okay?" Tanya asked, appearing beside her with a tray of dirty dishes. "I think so," May said uncertainly. "Just a lot to take in." "Those were some pretty important people you were talking to," Tanya observed. "What did they want?" "To change my life, apparently," May said with a hint of irony. "Is that a good thing?" "I'm not sure yet." By the time they finished cleaning up, it was past midnight. May's body ached with fatigue, but her mind was still racing. The night air felt good on her face as she left the restaurant and began walking toward the bus stop. "Need a ride?" She turned to see Vivian standing beside a sleek black car, driver waiting at the wheel. "I don't want to trouble you," May said. "It's no trouble. Where do you live?" "Parkview District." "It's not far. Get in," Vivian said, opening the car door. "We can talk on the way." Too tired to argue, May slid into the plush leather seat. The car pulled smoothly away from the curb, the restaurant's lights receding behind them. "You were quiet back there," Vivian observed after a moment, having second thoughts. May watched the city lights blur past the window. "I'm not sure what to think. Everything's happening so fast." "Powell tends to have that effect on situations," Vivian said dryly. "He sees something he wants and moves quickly. Is that what I am?" "Something he wants?" Vivian considered this. "In a way. He collects people with talent, musicians, artists, writers, supports them, promotes them, basks in their reflected glory." "Sounds manipulative," May said. "It can be," Vivian acknowledged, "but it can also be mutually beneficial. Many artists have built successful careers with his help. They rode in silence for a while, the gentle hum of the luxury car's engine the only sound. "You don't have to accept Powell's offer to apply to Westridge," Vivian said eventually. "The program exists independently of his patronage." May turned to look at her. "Why did you really invite me into the program?" "Was it just my playing?" Vivian smiled. "Your playing was extraordinary, yes. But it was also what I saw in your face when you played. That complete transformation. One moment you were a reluctant server forced to perform. The next you were an artist completely in your element. That kind of authentic connection to music can't be taught." The car slowed as they entered the Parkview district, a neighborhood of older apartment buildings and small shops. "It's the blue building on the corner," May directed the driver. As the car pulled up to the curb, she turned back to Vivian. "Thank you for the ride. And the advice. Think about what you want, May," Vivian said. "Not what Powell wants or what I want or anyone else. What do you want for your life?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. As May climbed the stairs to her small apartment, she felt the weight of Vivian's card in one pocket and Powell's in the other, two different paths suddenly opening before her. Inside, she moved automatically through her nighttime routine, too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion. She made tea and carried it to the corner of her living room where her keyboard sat on a folding table. The plastic keys looked cheap and toy-like after the magnificent Steinway she'd played tonight. She set down her tea and switched on the keyboard, plugging in headphones so as not to disturb her neighbors. As her fingers touched the keys, she closed her eyes, trying to recapture the feeling she'd experienced during her performance. That sense of reconnection, of coming home to something essential she'd almost lost. The keyboard's sound was thin compared to the piano's rich tones, but in her mind she could still hear the Steinway's resonance, could still feel the perfect weight of its action under her fingers. She played softly, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, working through passages from the pieces she'd performed earlier. When she finally stopped and opened her eyes, she was surprised to find tears on her cheeks. Something had awakened in her tonight, something she'd tried to bury but couldn't quite kill. The question now was what to do about it. May barely slept that night. She lay awake watching shadows move across her ceiling, her mind replaying the evening's events on an endless loop. By the time dawn broke, she had made at least a dozen different decisions about her future, only to question each one moments later. Sunday passed in a haze of uncertainty. She cleaned her apartment, did laundry, and tried to distract herself with mundane tasks. Several times she sat at her keyboard, but the plastic keys felt even more inadequate after her night with the Steinway. Tanya called twice, eager for updates and bubbling with excitement about May's big break. Her enthusiasm was both touching and exhausting. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Tanya asked. "Are you going to take Powell up on his offer?" "I don't know yet," May answered truthfully. "What's there to think about? This is your chance to escape food service purgatory." But it wasn't that simple. Something about Powell's offer didn't sit right with her. The way he spoke about her, as if she were a discovery, a possession, a reflection of his own good taste. It made her uneasy. Monday morning arrived too quickly. May had the day off from the restaurant but knew she needed to meet with Powell about payment for Saturday night. She dressed carefully in the nicest clothes she owned, black pants and a simple blue blouse that her mother had sent for her birthday. Powell's office was in a gleaming high-rise downtown. The receptionist greeted her with practiced politeness, obviously assuming she was there to apply for a job. "I have an appointment with Mr. Powell," May explained. "May-chin." Recognition flickered across the woman's face. "Oh, the pianist. Yes, he's expecting you." She was led through an open workspace where young professionals hunched over computers, then down a hallway lined with modern art to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Powell greeted her with expansive warmth, as if they were old friends. "May, come in, come in. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water? Water would be fine, thank you." He gestured for her to sit in one of the sleek chairs facing his desk while he poured water from a crystal carafe. The office offered a spectacular view of the city skyline, a pointed reminder of his position and power. "I've been thinking about our discussion," Powell said, handing her the water. "I've already made some calls. The Arts Foundation is hosting a gala next month. They'd love to have you perform. And I've spoken with a friend who runs a prestigious music school downtown about teaching opportunities." May set her glass down carefully. "That's very generous, Mr. Powell, but—" "Jackson, please," he interrupted with a smile. "Jackson," she corrected herself. "I appreciate your interest, but I'm still considering my options." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're hesitating. Why? This is a remarkable opportunity." How could she explain the complicated feelings churning inside her, the wariness about his motives, the discomfort with how quickly he sought to control her future, the lingering resentment over how he'd forced her to perform in the first place? "I'm not sure this is the right path for me," she said finally. Powell frowned. "What other path is there? You're clearly wasting your talent serving drinks." The dismissive comment stung. "My job may not be glamorous, but it's honest work. It pays my bills." "And barely, I'd imagine," he said. "I'm offering you a chance at something better." "On your terms," May pointed out. Powell's expression hardened slightly. "My terms include financial support, valuable connections, and prestigious performance opportunities. Most musicians would be grateful." "I am grateful for your interest," May said carefully. "But I need to make decisions that feel right for me. This is about Saturday night, isn't it?" Powell leaned forward. "You're still upset that I pushed you to perform. You didn't push me. You threatened my job." He waved his hand dismissively. "A bit of pressure, perhaps. But look at the result. You were magnificent, and now doors are opening for you." "That doesn't justify how you did it," Powell sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Sometimes people need a push to overcome their fears." "I did you a favor." "A favor I didn't ask for," May said quietly. They sat in tense silence for a moment. Powell tapped his fingers on his desk, clearly unaccustomed to having his generosity questioned. "Let me be direct," he said finally. "I'm prepared to offer you a monthly stipend to cover your living expenses while you restart your music career. In exchange, you'll perform at my events when needed, and credit me as your patron when appropriate. I'll introduce you to the right people, help you build a reputation. Eventually, you'll have teaching opportunities, recording possibilities, who knows? With your talent and my connections, the possibilities are endless." It was a generous offer, objectively speaking, the kind that could change her life. Yet something fundamental was missing. "And what about my education?" May asked. "Vivian mentioned the program at Westridge." Powell frowned slightly. "I'm not sure that's necessary. Why go back to school when you could be performing and building practical experience?" And there it was, the heart of the difference between Powell's vision and Vivian's. One saw her as a finished product to be displayed, the other as an artist still developing. "I think I need to grow as a musician," May said, "not just perform." "Growth happens on stage, not in classrooms," Powell countered. "But if you insist on more education, I could speak with some private instructors." May nodded, not arguing but not agreeing either. "You mentioned payment for Saturday night?" Recognizing the change of subject, Powell reached into his desk drawer and removed an envelope. "As promised, $1,000. He slid it across the desk. The envelope looked thin to contain so much money, more than she'd make in a week at the restaurant. "Thank you," she said, taking it. "Think about my offer, May," Powell said, his tone softening. "This doesn't have to be complicated. I have resources, you have talent. We can help each other." "I'll think about it," she promised, rising to leave. "Don't take too long," he advised. "Opportunities like this are rare." As she left his office, May felt both relief and confusion. The envelope in her purse represented the most money she'd ever been paid for playing piano. Yet it came with invisible strings attached, expectations and obligations she wasn't sure she wanted to accept. Instead of heading home, she found herself walking to a nearby park. She sat on a bench overlooking a small pond, watching ducks glide across the water while children threw breadcrumbs from the shore. She took out her phone and looked at Vivian's card, which she'd photographed to ensure she wouldn't lose it. After a moment's hesitation, she dialed the number. "This is Vivian Ko," came the crisp answer. "Professor Ko, this is May Chen, from Saturday Night." "May, I was hoping to hear from you." "How are you?" "Confused," May admitted. "I just met with Powell. He has big plans for my future." Vivian made a small knowing sound. "I'm sure he does. And what plans do you have for your future?" The question caught May off guard. "I'm not sure yet. That's why I'm calling. I wanted to know more about the Westridge program. Of course, it's a 2-year course designed for working adults with significant prior musical training. Classes are evenings and weekends with performance requirements each semester. The scholarship covers tuition and includes a modest living stipend. And if I were to apply, applications for the fall term close in 2 weeks, Vivian said. You would need letters of recommendation, transcripts from your previous studies, and an audition. May took a deep breath. Would Saturday Night count as an audition? Vivian chuckled. Under normal circumstances, no. But in your case, I think an exception could be made. Your performance was memorable. Powell doesn't think I need more education, May said. He wants me to start performing at his events right away. Of course he does, Vivian said dryly. Jackson always wants immediate results. But music isn't a business venture with quarterly returns. It's a lifelong journey. They talked for nearly an hour, discussing the program's details, the faculty, the performance opportunities. Unlike Powell's grand but vague promises, Vivian offered specifics: course names, practice facilities, student concerts, master classes with visiting artists. I should warn you, Vivian said toward the end of their conversation. If you choose Westridge over Powell's patronage, he won't be pleased. He's not used to people saying no to him. I'm starting to realize that, May said. He's not a bad person, Vivian added. Just used to getting his way. And to be fair, his support has launched many careers. Just not on my terms, May said quietly. Exactly, Vivian agreed. The question is, what are your terms? After they hung up, May sat watching the pond for a long time, turning the question over in her mind. What did she want? Not just for her music, but for her life? The answer came to her slowly, piecing itself together from fragments of the past 2 days. She wanted to play again, really play, not just practice alone in her apartment with headphones. She wanted to grow, to learn, to discover what kind of artist she could become. But she also wanted autonomy, the freedom to choose her own path without owing her success to someone else's patronage. By the time she left the park, her decision was made. The next morning, she called Powell's office and politely declined his offer. That afternoon, she submitted her application to Westridge. 2 weeks later, May sat in a practice room at the conservatory, waiting for her formal interview with the admissions committee. Her hands were steady as she warmed up on the piano, not a Steinway, but a well-maintained Yamaha that responded beautifully to her touch. She thought about how much had changed since that night at the restaurant. She still worked there, though Phil had adjusted her schedule to accommodate her audition preparations. Tanya had been supportive in her own way, though clearly baffled by May's decision to turn down Powell's offer. I hope you know what you're doing, she'd said. May wasn't entirely sure she did. The path she'd chosen wasn't easy or glamorous. If accepted to Westridge, she'd still need to work part-time. There would be no immediate performances in elegant venues, no wealthy patron opening doors, but when she placed her hands on the keys and began to play, first scales to warm up, then the Bach prelude she'd prepared for her audition, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just the joy of making music, but a sense of ownership over her own talent and future. A knock at the door announced that the committee was ready for her. May gathered her music and stood, smoothing her simple black dress. As she walked toward the audition room, she felt nervous but no longer afraid. Whatever happened next would be on her terms.